All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Wow, how'd you like that countdown? That was pretty cool, right? 2026. Okay, so it is a shame that 2026 is so boring and uneventful so far. 8 whole days in. Of course, I'm kidding. Every day contains a week's worth of news, especially since Trump became president again. But we have narrowed it down to just a couple of the events this week for you guys. A Hilton Hotels franchisee went off the reservation to block DHS employees from being able to book rooms. We may have done a little something in Venezuela. And a communist appointee of New York City, Mayor Mamdani, who I still can't say the name of, who advocates for the confiscation of property from people, is actually a beneficiary of generational wealth herself. Go figure. And for Unhinged, well, it's pretty pathetic. You'll have to wait and see. We are going to talk about all of this on episode 523 of the In the Tank podcast. Okay. Well, wait, we had a stinger. Go.
We had a stinger at the end of that. Oh, well.
First episode of the year, guys. You got to give us a little.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've been on the show, so that's my fault, guys. I usually do those intros for us with something fun. It was supposed to have at the end of it Zora Mamdani talking about the replacing cold rugged individualism with the warm embrace of collectivism. So just imagine he said it. You can find it on X, but sorry.
Yeah. All right. So everyone, welcome to the In the Tank podcast and Happy New Year. I am Linnea Lueken, your host. And as usual, we also have Jim Lakely, Vice President and Director of Drops at the end of the intro videos at the Heartland Institute, Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow, and Chris Talgo, Editorial Director and Socialism Research Fellow. And guys, I do want to bring something up before we get into our actual programming, or even saying, our chit chat at the beginning here, because this wasn't on the schedule when I was preparing for the show today, but happy United Nations Liberation Day, I guess. Last night, Trump withdrew our membership from tons of United Nations organizations, including the UN IPCC and the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and a bunch having to do with gender and racial identity politics, just all sorts of stuff like that, meaning we are no longer funding these groups with the United Nations. I was already offline by that time that news dropped, and so I am sort of surprised that I didn't feel some sort of like disturbance in the force or something, like a million crying globalists suddenly going silent. So we might have to...
What?
We might have to talk about this some, you guys, at the start of the show, because, wow, what a treat. Right, just in time for, as Steve Malloy pointed out, Christmas for the Eastern Orthodox. So,
yeah, I'll just start. I mean, look, I've been listening to talk radio. I've been in the conservative movement, consuming conservative media from way back. When I first graduated from college, I was so excited. I got my first apartment, and I was very excited to have the American Spectator, edited by R. Emmett Terrell, sent to my very home for the first time. And I would read Heterodox Magazine, which long ago didn't exist. And in those and National Review, of course, back in the day. And conservatives would dream of, the ultimate dream would be kicking the United Nations out of Turtle Bay and having them go back to Brussels or wherever the heck they come from, and would be more comfortable. instead of the United States continually funding policies and agitation that almost always works against the national interest of the United States. And it was just kind of a fun thing you would like to say. What happened on January 7th, Orthodox Christmas, so thanks for all who celebrate it. And now it's time to celebrate for everybody, whether you're Orthodox Christian or not. This would have been unfathomable. I am still gobsmacked at what Donald Trump is willing to do in his second term that we thought maybe he was crazy enough to attempt to do in his first term. Of course, he wasn't that brave. When Donald Trump came into office the first time, I still am convinced that he was surprised he won. I think we could see it on his face and in his body language, in his acceptance, on the night of election night when he came out on stage, that he was shocked. I was shocked. The world was shocked. And he wasn't quite prepared to do all the things that he thought he might need to do to, quote, make America great again. So to pull the United States out of the United Nations Climate Treaty, to pull us out of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to have Scott Bessent announce on X that we are no longer going to give a dime to the Green Climate Fund, which is a big slush fund for corruptocrats in the United Nations around the world. And then I think we're out of the WHO. This is unbelievable. And it's long overdue. These globalist organizations formed, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, formed with good intentions, have done a lot more ill in the world than they have done any good, and certainly have not achieved their missions. Their missions have turned into stealing your freedom, stealing American money, and filling their pockets. And for the President of the United States to say no more, not just to one or two of these organizations, but 66 of them, or 67, is absolutely gobsmackingly amazing. And it took me by surprise. It certainly took the world by surprise. And it is, if Donald Trump was to accomplish nothing else in his second term, this would go down as historic and plenty.
I'll just jump in real quick. I agree with Jim. This is awesome news. This is great. I think when Trump first came into office and Doge was cutting government spending, it was just like a dream come true. However, I fear that this can be undone by the next president. So while we can, definitely celebrate it for the time being, wish that the Senate would actually put their big boy pants on and maybe, pass some treaties so that this could actually be done at the Senate level instead of just at the executive level. So that's just my 2 cents.
One of the problems with the UN is, of course, the one country, one vote element of it. The leadership of the various committees and the UN itself is very much from nations that do not hold the best interests of the United States close to their heart. And that is the major problem, and the reason that the people on the right in particular have long said, get the U.S. out of the UN. Jim mentioned National Review, but it's ironic, of course, that National Review was kind of wishy-washy about it for decades. And it was the John Birch Society, whom the National Review kicked out of the conservative movement, that really pushed against the U.S. involvement in the UN. So you could say that this is an aspect of the new right flexing its muscles once again.
Yeah, certainly. And my only small pushback is that I actually, Sam, don't think that other countries' main priorities should be the United States' health, but it certainly should be
You're right.
States' main priority, and therefore we should not be in these organizations that constantly try to siphon all of our money to fund nonsense climate stuff and worse. All right, so
Exactly.
I want to jump right into our unhinged segment today, which is unhinged, but in a sad way, not unhinged in a crazy, like hysterical way. So, although it is a little bit histrionic. So let's go and take a viewing of this video here from our wonderful Senate Democrats who held a candlelight vigil. Nope. Perhaps not. Okay. Sorry, guys. New Year.
And guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
For our audio listeners here, this is a video of Democrat lawmakers having a candlelight vigil on the eve of January 6th, to memorialize that terrible, scary event to them, where somebody partially kind of almost stole a podium, and a guy with a horn hat. That's what I was going to say is, if you leave your shoes outside of your door, actually, on Insurrection Day Eve, the QAnon shaman horn hat guy is going to come and leave little like American flag pins in them. So don't forget that next year. Anyway, this is just really sad. They are still working this. I can't believe that they have not all decided to worry about something else, but boy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I shared in our group chats, this morning, it's like, they wanted to go the full 9/11 remembrance technique. Having a chime gong and then calling out the names of the fallen and all the cops killed by Trump's brown shirts, but of course there were no names to read, so they had to skip over that one. And it's also very nice to see leftist Democrats finally find a patriotic song to sing that is not Commie Pete Seeger's "This Land Is Your Land." So I will give them credit for that.
Yeah. Well,
I was just going to say, just real quick. So, it was 5 years ago that January 6th took place. And I just think that it's remarkable that the Trump, campaign, just completely rose from the dead. I was one of those people that thought after January 6th, there's no way this guy's going to ever run for president again. And look what happened. So I think that just goes to show that if you have great policies that the people want, you can overcome even the mainstream media's, just torrential, lies about what happened in the days up to and after January 6th. And I think the American people just don't care about January 6th.
Well, the rise of new media, and in particular X, has really changed the equation altogether. There was a very successful effort to make the narrative about January 6th be that it was an insurrection and that it was a danger to the future of the nation. And that was very successful at the time. And then as the news was continually came out, for example, that there were no killings of police officers, thank you very much, but there were in fact killings of people who were protesting, and that there was in fact a clear movement of pushing people to enter that building, and that it wasn't arising from Donald Trump for sure. And it doesn't even seem to have been arising from the crowd. It seems to have been arising from agitators. And as all that information got out to people, the whole narrative started to crumble. This is a great lesson for us, that just keep pounding away with the truth, using every means of communication you have, and you can get things done. As it stands now, yes, there's no interest in this ridiculous event, and which I believe was very much sort of like the governor, Michigan governor plot, the plot against the Michigan governor to kidnap her and so forth, that it arose from within the government and not from outside. So it's really important that we get the right lesson from this, which is keep beating the bushes, keep telling the truth, and then let the chips fall where they may. But don't just give up, and don't try to be respected by the other side. The heck with that.
I do think I understand why lawmakers make such a big deal about January 6th, because you do need to understand that this happened, in their workplace. And I do, I do think that, for them it was very different from what we experienced. 5 years later, they should understand, especially the Democrats, that the American people don't care about this. They are much more concerned with tangible issues like, healthcare costs and the affordability crisis. So it would behoove them to make sure that they are actually addressing the things that the American people, actually care about.
Your last point is critical because this is just pure deflection and always was.
Alrighty. Well, I just wanted to make sure that our audience was aware that Democrats are still, they are a threat, and they are also still very pathetic and cringe. All right. So, topic number 2, though, that I want to go over today is Wow. Okay. Talk very briefly about Down and Out at the Hampton Inn. So this is kind of crazy, you guys. On January 5th, the Department of Homeland Security reported that a franchise of Hilton hotels, Hampton Inn specifically, was maliciously canceling reservations from government employees who work with immigration enforcement. This happened to multiple officers and agents who got emails that explicitly told them that that was why their reservation was being canceled. One email said, "After further investigation online, we have found information about immigration work connected with your name, and we will be canceling your upcoming reservation." Other emails were similar. And Zero Hedge reports that Hilton Hotels wasted no time in the past 24 hours in curbing a rogue franchisee under the Hampton Inn brand called Hampton Inn by Hilton Lakeville, just outside the downtown Minneapolis, because they're having an all right time lately. After news broke Monday that the independently owned hotel had rejected reservations from anyone affiliated with Department of Homeland Security. Uproar on X prompted Hilton to make a statement. So the Hilton brand did come down at least a little bit on this particular franchisee, though shortly after the first statement from Hilton, it took independent journalist Nick Sordor to go to the location itself, and he asked desk employees, and they said that there was no change made to their anti-ICE policy. So after that video went viral, then Hilton responded again, promising that the franchisee was being deflagged. So this actually brings up to me an important question that I haven't quite settled on an answer for yet. It might actually be one of those where there is no umbrella answer for me. I would have to think it over for a while, I guess. But I wanted to know, and I'll pitch it to you first, Jim. Would something like this, in a sane world, at least, fall under freedom of association? Now, Hilton corporate said, no, our franchise cannot discriminate against immigration enforcement. So that's done on that end. And I don't think that a business should be banning cops or immigration enforcement. There's something I'd like to have. I think they do important and vital services, and I want them to be able to do that work at location efficiently and effectively. I think it's actually another kind of authoritarianism when businesses can decide together that law enforcement isn't allowed to perform their job. But I'm just curious what you guys think.
Well, this goes back to cancel culture, which we talked about a lot on this podcast when that was a thing, which is not a thing anymore. And cancel culture just seems to always run in just one direction. And I'm sure Sam and Chris have great reflections on this too. But when you think about it, there is the idea of a public accommodation, going back to, the civil rights era. You can't deny people access to your, a public place of business based on the color of their skin. And you shouldn't be able to do that if that's the law now. You shouldn't be able to do that either based on who they work for, that they work for immigration and customs enforcement. They work for ICE, or they work for the government, or they are they work for the Trump administration. It brings to mind that infamous shouting rally that Maxine Waters gave, that if you see any of these Trump people anywhere at a gasoline station, you get in their faces and you tell them, you're not welcome here anymore. All right, well, that's free speech. It's rude. It's a shitty thing to do to a fellow American, but fine, you can go ahead and do that. And then there's the idea that, well, Hilton as a corporation can set corporate policy for all of its franchisees. And if it gets word that one of its franchisees happens to be a radical, unthinking leftist who decides on his own that even though I benefit from the fact that I'm in the Hilton family, the Hilton hotel family, that I'm just going to decide as the franchisee that nobody from ICE who needs to come to Minneapolis to round up illegal alien criminals and get them out of our country is going to be able to use my hotel as an accommodation. Well, Hilton has the ability to crack down on that franchisee because they own the business. And credit to Hilton for not allowing this sort of discrimination to go on under their name. It seems very smart to do so, because if you're a business, and Hollywood learned this the hard way, it's a bad idea to piss off half the country with mindless, hateful, really, policies such as this.
I'm more conflicted on this. So there's a side of me, my stark libertarian side, that says businesses should be allowed to determine who they want to do business with. And I'll use the example of the Colorado baker who said, you know what, I'm a very religious person and I would rather not make a cake for a gay wedding. I understand that. And Jim, I understand what you're talking about with the 1950s and the accommodation stuff. So if someone, a black man wanted to eat in a restaurant or stay in a hotel, they were like, no, just strictly based on your skin color. However, I do think that businesses, restaurants should be able to say, you know what, we just don't want to serve you. And I know that sounds really bad and really mean and like very discriminatory. However, in a free market system, you know what would happen? If most of the other customers said, well, we don't want to go there anymore, they would go out of business. So I can see both sides of this. I think that Hilton should be able to determine on its own what should be done in this particular situation. As long as the government is not coming in and using their heavy hand to force this business to do that, then I don't really have a problem with it.
Well, there are definitely conflicting interests, but if we're going to live in the world where you bake the damn cake, then it's going to apply to everybody. These rules are not only going to apply to people who are not leftists.
Right. I would just rather live in a world in which people have the choice to do. Yeah, I know.
But we don't live in that. And I am done applying rules of principle and comity to one side.
I like your point, your last point there, Jim. I'm an absolutist on freedom of association. And to me, freedom of association means the opposite also. You don't have to associate with anybody you don't want to. You don't have to serve anybody you don't want to. We used to call that slavery, but I guess it's not when the U.S. government does it in the 20th and 21st century. I think that the provisions in the 1965 Civil Rights Law in that regard are unconstitutional and immoral. As far as I'm concerned, if the 4 Indians who own the hotel in Minneapolis decide that they don't want ICE in there, that's their business. I couldn't care less. But what I do care about is that, as Jim said, this only gets applied on one side. Let's have true freedom. Let's have true freedom of association and say that if somebody doesn't want to associate with somebody else, they don't have to. As Chris said, if it may sound a bit harsh that, well, you can't be in my restaurant because because other people don't want you there and they won't support our restaurant if we let you in. Well, you know what? Yeah, too bad. Booker T. Washington, his point was, if people won't let you in somewhere, build a better one. And somehow we just all forgot about that we said, oh no, only the government can do any building. Only the government can get people to associate with one another. No, that's not decent. It's not moral. And it is totally unconstitutional. We have got to get this out of our statutes. And that's a fact. Until people have true freedom of association, this country isn't free at all. So yeah, I'm an absolutist on this. And to me, that answers the question of whether these people are right or wrong to do it. It doesn't matter. They have the right. And if I think they're wrong, then I have the right not to go there. And in fact, I have the right to protest them and so forth.
Yeah.
I also disagree with the notion that you have a right to get in somebody's face and yell at them in a restaurant because they're politically different from you. That's assault. I think you should get punched in the face if you do that, or have a water thrown on you or whatever it is. But we have the government again. The government here is enforcing one side of things. They're enforcing if you start to touch somebody, it counts. But if somebody is spitting in your face with curse words and so forth, well, you just have to take it. No, we need to get some common sense in this country and get away from these absurd universal rules that we've made up that aren't applied universally because they can't be. So, like I say, I'm an absolutist on this, and I think it answers the questions very, very well.
And I
Just
know
if I
it's not.
could, oh,
Go
I'm
ahead. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, just real quick, just if I could follow up real quick on what I was saying earlier. So one of the things that was happening in the 1950s and 60s was the discrimination was systemic. So if a black man wanted to get a hotel throughout the South, he was basically just completely barred. This is one hotel.
The government was doing that, and that is wrong. You're right.
And this is one hotel just, making in my opinion, a very stupid business decision. And when I was referring to the restaurants, I was more referring to like when Sarah Huckabee Sanders went to that, like the Rooster or something like that in Washington, D.C., when she was press secretary for Donald Trump in his first term. And that owner of that restaurant just said, you know what, we don't want you to be here. And I do think that owner of the restaurant has the right to do that, although I totally disagree with it from a business point of view. So that's where I'm just trying to make sure that I'm, drawing a line between, I personally disagree with it. However, I do think that they should be allowed to have that decision because it's their place of business.
You're starting to sound like an absolutist, Chris. Let's go.
Well, I knew I would get a good discussion if I framed my my question for that topic in the right way, and we certainly did. So thank you guys very much. But I do want to move along here because we have so much to talk about. It's unbelievable how much has gone on in just the last 8 days. My next topic here is simply, what is the deal with Venezuela? This is probably the biggest news of the week, so we couldn't ignore it entirely, even though like geopolitics isn't typically our normal area. And for that reason, I am going to stay away from saying whether or not I think the military engagement itself was a good idea or the right move. And I'm not going to make commentary about political nation building or what I expect to happen from here specifically because I don't know. None of us do. And neither do any social media influencers or commentators, regardless of how much they try to spin everybody up. We do have an op-ed by Chris talking about how Venezuela was destroyed by socialism. That's not controversial. It's definitely something that we're going to discuss here. But before we get to that angle, I want to share a little bit of commentary on the energy part of the discussion here, a little bit of history. So Venezuela's oil industry was once private and diverse, and frankly helped the country to do a lot better than many of their neighbors. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, proven reserve of crude oil on the planet. In 2007, Hugo Chavez seized the assets of ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips and other companies and nationalized Venezuela's oil industry after the companies themselves refused to voluntarily give up their equipment and holdings and all of that to the state oil company. And so I have a bit of a connection to this, actually. So since the company I worked for before I came to Heartland, when I was working offshore, was among those whose stuff was expropriated. And since then, the company has put all these like software self-destruct protocols and stuff on all of their programs in order to protect their data in case this ever happened again, or if it happened, I believe it also happened with Mexico to an extent. The protocols are really annoying to work with, and it made my job way harder. And so I blame socialists for that. And there are still some companies working in Venezuela like Chevron. Some of the heavy crude that we receive to the U.S. Gulf Coast refineries, which are built for heavy crude, comes from that effort. Another major group investing in Venezuela under both Chavez and then Maduro are Chinese state-owned oil companies and the state oil companies of Russia to the tune of billions of dollars. And so it should come as no surprise to our viewers that Venezuela completely dropped the ball on their domestic oil production. Turns out communists aren't super good at handling the industry that they take. The companies they stole from actually knew better how to produce the most oil for their investment. And since then, production has really floundered. And so, depending on how things go from here, there is a chance that many of the companies stolen from are going to be able to get restitution. There's a major player who has threatened to use their own heavy crude exports as leverage against Trump's America First policies that we also need to keep our eye on. And I'm sorry to our wonderful Canadian viewers, but that's Canada. David Blackman from Energy Absurdity points this out in a really good Substack article that I recommend. It's titled Trump's Venezuela Move, a $17 trillion reset of global geopolitics. And the section regarding Canada is pretty interesting, I thought. He wrote, frustrated with Trump's tariffs on his oil exports into the U.S., Karnick has been working with Albertan Premier Danielle Smith on a deal to build a massive new pipeline to reroute oil sands crude to the West Coast for shipment to Asian markets. What do we think they mean by Asian markets? Karnick believed that he had leverage over Trump in this equation, given that most U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are geared to process heavy Canadian crude. Now, armed with control over Venezuela's crude riches, the leverage reverses in Trump's favor. So, Sam, there are so many moving pieces here, so much at play, but I thought that I would lay out some of the energy element here to get us started. And again, I don't know how all of this is going to settle. Maybe nothing is going to change at all. But if it weren't for the rapacious, let's say, appetite of communists and socialists, we wouldn't be here at all, right?
You're absolutely right, Linnea. I seem to recall that Venezuela during the 1950s had the fourth highest GDP of any nation in the world. They were number 4 in GDP, gross domestic product. So that was they were doing fabulously well, and then slowly that was frittered away as they put more and more restrictions on their one industry, the oil extraction. And then, of course, went mad communist and elected Mamdani. No, somebody else.
Chavez.
Anyway, I know it's Chavez. But anyway, that's the point, is that they had a great extractive industry economy, and those tend to fall apart because you depend on it and you look at it as something that you can just go and grab, and the government can do better than the private sector. So that's the real fall of Venezuela should teach us a lot of lessons in that regard. Let me just get to one point on what the outcomes of this will be. I believe that it will strengthen the U.S. dollar very much. We will have new oil coming on. Some of it will be relatively expensive. So the price of oil is going to have to go up before some of this oil sand oil can get to market. However, as more access is given to these oil fields, I believe that the prices of extraction will go down. So that's a very positive thing too. But as you add this oil into the world market, you're going to increase petrodollars. And the petrodollar was something that the United States established with Saudi Arabia right after Nixon took us off the gold standard. So that was the thing that rescued our country from absolute catastrophe of going off gold, because it, strangely enough, sort of tied our currency to an important mineral. But it's a volatile mineral, and so that's a volatile in the sense of the market for it. And so that's one reason that our economy and money have been so hinky over the past half century. But I think that this is going to strengthen the U.S. dollar, and I suspect that that's probably going to be the most important effect of this for Americans.
Absolutely. And also, like I've said before, those Gulf Coast refineries, most of them are geared specifically towards heavy crude
Yes.
and having all sorts of things go wrong trying to get oil to those refineries right now. It's
They have to
mostly
mix it. They
Canadian.
have to mix it in, don't they? With whatever U.S. oil we use, we have to mix in heavy.
Yeah, you have to mix in. And right now, so I've seen a lot of conversation about how, a lot of scoffing from the political class of people saying, well, it's not easy to get oil out of Venezuela and it will be unsafe, for companies to be there and stuff. And it's like, well, one, Chevron is still there. Chevron's the only
Yes.
one who hung on and was like, fine, we'll give you 80% or whatever of our business holdings in the region, to the whatever it is, the nationalized oil companies of Venezuela. And but we already have stuff that we're doing in Guyana. We already have stuff that we're doing off of like the coast of Africa and some very dangerous waters and stuff. The
Right.
oil industry is not going to be scared by local dangerous conditions. It's one of the most dangerous industries in the world already. I think that that's just a silly argument that I've been hearing from a lot of the people who, are of what we call the laptop class, which is what we all are now, but is, still fun to use that term. Anyway,
Well, you're right. Make it safe.
yeah.
It's not safe. Make it safe. And I think that the U.S. will certainly press for that.
Yep. Did we have any other commentary on the energy side of this before I'm going to move into Chris's Red State op-ed, which is just great, and you touched on a lot of the energy stuff too. And so
Let me just jump
Jim?
in real quick before we get to Chris. Yeah, I mean, looking at this and your background as a former, roughneck, as it were. Not really. I know that would be insulting to the ones who are doing that work on the rigs, but you have a lot of experience in this field, Linnea, and it's great for you to have your insight on that. My take on this, when I was hearing about this, I used to, for a few years, I lived in Bradford, PA, which is in northwestern Pennsylvania, which actually happens to be the first areas of the country that were exploited and drilled for oil was in northwestern Pennsylvania. And so in the early to mid 90s, when I lived there, many people, and so oil was discovered, I think 1878 or something like that. People in the 1990s had oil derricks on their properties, even if they just lived in a suburban home. They didn't build those things. They didn't install them. They hired someone to do it, and then they got a healthy cut of the profits. And it's the same for people up there in northwestern Pennsylvania, in the Allegheny, where the Allegheny National Forest and all that stuff is. They would own forest property, and they would have cherry trees, very high quality cherry trees that was used for furniture. And so they would just have that harvested, and the company that harvests it would make some money. They would make some money because they own the property, and everybody, in a voluntary exchange would come out ahead. And for Venezuela, it was pretty much the same thing. You had all these Western oil companies in there, and they had a great arrangement, but of course, Chavez, I'm just going to take over. We're going to nationalize the oil industry. That would be as dumb as me if I had an oil derrick on my property outside of Bradford, PA, and I kick Quaker State out of there, and I just try to extract that oil for myself. I would be terrible at trying to extract oil by myself. When the derrick, if I took Quaker State's derrick that they installed by force using a gun, which is what communist states do, as soon as that derrick breaks, which is inevitable, I would know how to fix it. And then suddenly this wonderful revenue stream that I had would just go away. And that's, I think, essentially what's happened in Venezuela. And so who knows what's going to happen in the future? I mean, this invasion it's not going to be Iraq. It's not going to be Afghanistan. It's in and out. It's more like, getting Noriega out of Panama, right? We didn't take over that country either. So, but Chavez could have kept the Western companies in there. He could have taken more of the money to enrich himself instead of enriching the country, and everything would have been great. But as usual, commies are idiots. They're mean, they're cruel, and they ruin their countries every single time.
Just to follow up on what Jim said, he's 1,000% correct, because in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, Venezuela was producing about 3 million barrels per day. Since 2014, that is less than 1 million barrels per day. And a lot of that's because the infrastructure is so old and it doesn't work anymore. They have no innovation. They have no technological progress going on here. So they're using outdated, oil infrastructure, and they're barely able to, drill and get, a couple 100,000 barrels per day. If they had, a free market, if they had, BP and all these other companies going in there and investing, man, they could be pumping, who knows, maybe 5 million barrels per day.
One last point, and that's an interesting point you bring up, Chris, because the closeness with Venezuela will give the United States a much bigger say in OPEC and its decisions.
That's true.
So that'll be very interesting.
Oh,
too.
yes.
Again, this all just strengthens the United States.
I saw the funniest take on this was someone, I think on LinkedIn or somewhere, who was making the argument that Venezuela's like oil and gas sector production is so unbelievably environmentally dirty compared to most other places in the world. And they said, I'm pulling up the message now. If new investment in the Venezuelan oil and gas sector helps capture some of that methane from their dirty operations, this will be huge for the climate. So, and the person who reposted it said, this is a guy who supports regime change on climate grounds, which I just thought was like the funniest perspective I could think of. But they're not wrong that, Venezuela, China, Russia, they don't give a rip about any environmental impacts. And of course, at the Heartland Institute, we're not worried about the like methane or carbon dioxide or whatever, but there are legitimate environmental hazards when it comes to drilling. And these countries, these like socialist communist countries and Russia, which is a weird blend of things, do not care. they do not care whatsoever. So yeah, that it was a funny point that I saw someone make. But Chris, I do want to get to your piece in Red State. Like I said, you did cover some of the energy stuff at the beginning of your article, but I also want to jump to kind of the middle-ish. Your article was called 2 Decades of Socialism Destroyed Venezuela. And I do recommend that everyone go read it in full. And you wrote, after 2 decades of socialism, Venezuela is currently the poorest nation in South America. As of today, more than 90% of Venezuelans live in poverty. 70% are struck in extreme poverty. From 2014 to 2021, Venezuela's GDP decreased by almost 75%. And for years, hyperinflation has wreaked havoc. Since 2014, Venezuela's oil production has starkly declined. And nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country because access to food, medicine, toilet paper, and other bare necessities has been severely limited. I don't know if you guys remember a couple of years ago, they said that people were killing and eating zoo animals. So that was fun. You wrote, in 2017, things got so bad that the average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds due to malnutrition. So it's incredible to me, Chris, that the whole world can watch this happen over and over again. And sure, every political system has problems. We can't make, heaven on earth ourselves, but socialism and communism are proven annihilators of the common man. The only benefactors are the party. So, I mean, how do we keep watching this happen? And everyone just says, oh, well, they tried. What? It was a disaster. What do you mean they just tried?
Well, so in 1998, when Hugo Chavez came into power, he did not, spell out exactly what he was going to do. It happened over a period of time. By 2006, he, basically created a socialist unified party. 2007, 1 year later, he did, nationalize almost all remaining of the, privately held oil in the country. And look what's happened since. It's been just a total downhill slide. In the meantime, like you said, the people at the top, the Maduros, the Chavezes, the people in the party, they have made out very well. They are the ones who are siphoning, what's left of that economy and just, enriching themselves. But the average Venezuelan obviously has been just crushed during this. And this is not just in Venezuela. This happens, like you said, in every single socialist government, from the Soviet Union, to Cuba, to China, to every single one of them. So, like you, I guess you said, why aren't we learning from this? I think the problem is lack of education, and that's a whole nother subject here. But I think that the American people do see that there was mass suffering, mass poverty in Venezuela. They do realize that Maduro was a very bad guy, a ruthless dictator. And I do think that most of the American people are supporting this just based on that premise alone.
Yeah, and I want to quickly address a question um, from one of our frequent viewers, Lake Lady 2602, who says, "Will the Venezuelan oil development endanger U.S. oil development markets? I ask because my sister-in-law works in the industry in the Permian. It's concerning." No, it's in part because Permian, they're already struggling because price of oil is too low, but Venezuela, that type of like offshore heavy crude is very expensive to develop. So right now, oil prices are too low to develop it anyway, to do new development there. So it's also not, it's going to take a couple years before it can kick in. And the oil that the Permian Basin produces is mostly lighter crudes and gas. But we still need heavy crude. So it's kind of a different category. So it shouldn't hurt US. And also, some of those values are factored on, like what reserves exist, and we already knew that these reserves exist. We're not adding anything new to the stream. We might be able to boost production from it, but it's not going to be fast enough, I don't think, to I mean, unless we have like a fleet waiting to immediately descend upon the fields and drill them and stuff. But I strongly suspect that that's not going to be the case, just based on the fact that it's still Venezuela's land. Like, it's not like we've taken the reservoir. There's still permitting and stuff that needs to be done. So it's going to be a lot.
But it could make our refineries here in the United States busier, right?
Yeah, which is a good thing.
And
Okay.
it would be nice if we would construct some too.
We've brought on a couple the last couple of months that are pretty good. Let's see.
Linnea, I got one just quick question. So
Yeah.
what about when the cost of drilling decreases? So in 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, what if the cost of drilling is cut by 90%? Wouldn't it then be economically viable to drill, even if the price of oil was 40 or 20 or even $10
Yeah.
a barrel?
Well, for sure, but there is, like, you can't plan on that happening. It's kind of
No,
like
but hasn't that happened over time? I mean,
Yeah.
so
To a
that's just
point.
innovation and technology, right?
Yeah, but also new technology tends to be more expensive. It becomes less expensive over time, but there's certain, like, really complex, the offshore industry is kind of a different animal than the onshore industry. It's got the technology that they use out there. People tend to compare it to like NASA level stuff. So it's kind of like unbelievably expensive that we already do it, and that it already is such a huge part of our industry.
But
That
just when you think of the long, like,
yeah,
the long term, so, like with AI, they might be able to, use AI data to sense, what's going on underground, who the heck knows? Because when you think of, like, people digging out gold back in the day, I mean, they had to go and pan for it. That was so, like, basic and so simple. Nowadays, we have, these programs that can go in and at least guess as to where the gold is, to what degree it is, all that kind of stuff. So I do think that when people say, oh, if the price of oil drops below $50, it's not going to be, worth, drilling anymore. That's only based on whether the price of extracting it reduces at a higher rate.
yeah, and I don't think it historically has dropped at a higher rate than the price of oil can drop.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not saying that it's impossible, but just that that's not really the trend that we typically see. It does decrease over time, but we're talking about like decades,
Right.
when we
Yeah.
want to get this stuff online in like 5 to 7 years, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So yes,
That's
and
a
no.
really important. Yeah, that's a really important point, is that this is all about today and the next few years. We'll be using those Fusion 5000s in our cars and, dumping our dish waste in there. So.
Well,
Yeah.
eventually they're going to have robots just, like working those rigs. Sorry, all those roughnecks and wildcatters, but you will be replaced by robots.
Learn
Watch
to
the newest
code.
episode of Landman. It's coming down the pike. I guarantee you.
There will be blood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. It's quite complicated, and even if you can automate stuff, it's not quite so easy as all that. But okay. So do we have anything else to add to the Venezuela situation, or can we also have our main topic today that I
Can
really
I
want
just
to
make
focus.
one very, very
Yes,
non-political
please do,
comment, just
Chris.
real quick? Regardless of whether or not you agree with the operation, it was flawless, and that just goes to show how awesome and amazing the American military is.
And how amazing the American people are. We've got skills all across this country like you wouldn't believe.
I think Americans just take this for granted, but think back, you know,
Yes.
when Jimmy Carter went in and tried to rescue the hostages, some bad stuff happened. So this was literally flawless. Not one American person got killed, and we had one helicopter or airplane that was damaged, but guess what? It landed. So wow, just props to the U.S. military.
And I'll just say one last thing, is that Venezuela was defended by Chinese and Russian technology, and it was 100% worthless. It was worse than worthless because they thought it was protecting them when it wasn't. And so that's something China and Russia should probably think about if they try to mess around with the United States.
It's fascinating that they didn't know this.
Yeah,
That we were able to keep it secret, not only from the American people, that our government was able to keep it secret, but also from the enemy, which is very unusual for America.
That's because Congress didn't know.
All right. So I would love, I could talk about that for eons because I love military stuff and whatnot, but I don't want to step into that quagmire quite so strongly. So I do want to talk about, as bad as socialism has, ravaged countries outside of the United States. Let's take a look at our little mini Venezuela that we have cooking here, and that is New York City. We all knew that Mamdani was going to bring a very dark period for New York, but I think that some people are still surprised to discover that he and his aides' rhetoric isn't just rhetoric. I'm going to read again from another fabulous Chris Talgo piece. He writes, PBS lauds Mamdani's immutable traits, the first Muslim, first South Asian, first African-born person, as historic first for the city, while ignoring the much bigger and more relevant historic first for the city, which is the fact that Zoran Mamdani is the first socialist mayor of New York City. Mamdani began his inaugural address by declaring, "My fellow New Yorkers, today begins a new era." He should have clarified that the new era he refers to is socialism. Beginning today, we will govern expansively and audaciously, he said. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism, he sneered. And Chris goes on to point out that the democratic socialism that he's talking about is still just socialism, even though he was elected into it. It's still socialism. And Chris, you predict at the end of your post, stay tuned. This real-life New York City socialist soap opera will be full of intrigue, power, betrayal, and so much more. And lo, Chris is a prophet. He said that this was going to be full of intrigue. Enter Mamdani's director of the city office to protect tenants, Sia Weaver. Unearthed social media posts show that she believes private property, including any kind of, especially homeownership, is a weapon of white supremacy, along with other racist and communist positions like that. There is no such thing as a good gentrifier, only people who are actively working on projects to dismantle white supremacy and capitalism, and people who aren't. That's ironic given where she was living at the time that she said that, which was a neighborhood that she was contributing to the gentrification of. But anyway, as the New York Post reports, she burst into tears when she was confronted by reporters pressuring her about her mother's $1.6 million home in a gentrified neighborhood of Tennessee. And I've said it in the past because people like to say, oh, she's a hypocrite. But this sort of thing shouldn't surprise any of us, really, because it's entirely on par for the course with communists. Communism is, ironically kind of a bourgeois ideology in the first place, right? It always has been. They recruit the support of people who are down and out or are struggling with promises of help and free stuff, and mostly just ginning up, resentment towards others. But Jim, it doesn't come from the working class, right?
No, it doesn't. And, we have some video clips here. I think it's really important to hear it right from Sia Weaver's own mouth. To harp on the we'll play it here in a second, but like as Chris wrote in his piece in Town Hall, Socialism in the City, fantastic headline. I don't know if Chris suggested that, but most publications come up with their own headlines, and it's pretty darn catchy. But she, Zora Mamdani says, I'm a democratic socialist. Sia Weaver is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the party itself. And she is a straight up Marxist commie. She's a Bolshevik. It is absolutely mind-blowing that an American, I guess it's not that mind-blowing, considering the university she went to, but it is so anti-American. Her entire economic and social viewpoint is not compatible with a free country, and certainly not the United States of America. And the way she talks about property and her style of speaking, it's like fingers on a chalkboard. But it's important to really listen to it. So can we play, Andy, that the Weaver property video?
I think the reality is that for centuries we've really treated property as an individualized good and not a collective good, and we are going to transitioning to treating it as a collective good and towards a model of shared equity will require that we think about it differently. And it will mean that families, especially white families, but some POC families who are homeowners as well, are going to have a different relationship to property than the one that we currently have.
Different relationship to property. That's interesting. And Linnea, I know that this video has all three things that you really love in videos. One, it has vocal fry, it has uptalk, and it also has crazy eyes. So it's got the three things that you really look for in a good video for In the Tech podcast.
It's
but
great.
Just the casualness in which she talks about this is not something that she just thought of today. She's been brought up in this ideology where, well, of course, we have to rethink the way property. And look at this thing on the screen. There's no such thing as a good gentrifier. Only people who are actively working on projects to dismantle white supremacy and capitalism, and people who aren't. Let's impoverish the white middle class. Home ownership is racist. And then before that on the screen, the story at the New York Post, she's finally asked about this now that she is in a position of enormous power in New York City, the most important and largest city in the United States. As soon as she's asked about it, she starts crying. So you don't know whether, you should laugh or cry at this stuff or be really, really concerned about what's going on, because, we all predicted that New York City was going to go downhill. I don't think we all predicted that it was going to be happen this fast and have people talking openly about their plans to seize the property that isn't theirs for the common good, for the collective good. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And I wonder how long she'll last in office. If she can't take one day of questioning from her gentrified neighborhood in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, maybe she's not made out for public service, and that would be a good thing.
So she was put in charge of housing. I called her the housing czar. And it's just funny because I did some research on the New York City rental market and the housing market. Did you know that the average apartment rental in New York City is 150% higher than the national rate? The average median home sales price in New York City was $780,000, about $300,000 higher than the national median sales price. And then when you look back and you see that New York City was the first city in the entire country in 1943 to implement rent control laws, and they have been doing it ever since. That is the reason why New York City is at a total housing crisis. And what's the solution on her? Let's just double down and do more of it. She was the executive director of the Housing Justice for All lobbying organization in New York State, which of course was about housing as a human right, rent control, rent freezes, rent subsidies, social housing, literally social housing, not public housing, social housing. So this woman is just, off the reservation, and she's just going to make the affordability housing crisis in New York City 10 trillion times worse.
Actually, I think she's going to improve the situation. If she succeeds in having her rhetoric become policy, that'll be fantastic. Everybody will leave, and then you'll have a much lower demand for housing in New York City. Prices will drop.
Yeah, if they're allowed to drop, but then all of a sudden they'll shift towards like, oh, we have to protect the government or the rent owners in the government, and they'll just like sell the buildings to BlackRock or something. But I do want to point out though, because a lot of people were making fun of this woman for, crying and being really pretty emotionally fragile when it comes to being confronted on her beliefs and stuff. And so they're saying, oh, these Marxists aren't serious. They're not a threat because look at how fragile they are or whatever. For all of history, emotionally fragile Marxists have been the ones to point a gun at you and send you to the gulag. So let's not, just because, you think you could beat them in a fight or something does not mean that they will not kill you and your family. And they will not support policies and promote policies that will kill you and your family.
And the people that she's supposedly representing are the ones that are going to get hit hardest by these policies, because they're the ones who don't have, the ability to go move into the suburbs or to go move, to a different state. They're stuck. And they're the ones who are, just really paying the toll for her and her woke policies to make herself feel better.
Yep.
The least support for Mamdani was in Staten Island, where the people actually are pretty much working people, and it's sort of more like an American place than the rest of New York City. And so this is going to play out just as we expect. The only issue I think that we're dealing with here today is, boy, how fast this is happening. That's pretty impressive.
All right, I want to show another element of this, you guys, in case you think, well, rent is expensive in New York, so what? What do we care? It's not like they're seizing properties or something. Cue this Weaver Buildings video that we have here.
For acquiring distressed housing could look different on a building by building basis. In some cases, what happens is tenants form a tenant association. They have a scofflaw landlord or someone who's not making repairs, and they could pressure, using organizing tactics, they could pressure to the Social Housing Development Authority to take over their homes, to buy their homes. In other cases, it might happen through like a legal process. A couple of days ago, one of the most notorious slumlords in the city, his name is Ob Shalom. He was arrested because he is treating his tenants so badly, hundreds of thousands of open code violations. In cases like that, where the city is actively pursuing already sort of litigation and enforcement mechanisms against the landlord, the SHDA is an option. We can say, hey, you are not maintaining this building, and we are the city of New York. We have an interest in making sure that housing is well maintained, and we're going to take this building away from you.
Public housing is never well maintained. For people who don't know about public housing, go read about Cabrini Green in Chicago. Go read about the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago. You know what they were? Total cesspools of murder, crime, drugs, all sorts of terrible stuff. The fact that she wants to basically, just pepper New York City with more of that, it's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and notice that she's really not interested in improving public housing in New York City, which you would imagine is the actual mandate of the office that she heads. Mm-hmm. They're not interested in that. They're interested in seizing private property. They're seizing the property of others, and as it always is with these commies, these are people with no expertise in their actual areas of control. She says that she's been working on housing policy in nonprofits and other places her entire professional life. She's in her, I think, mid-30s. She's never been a building manager. She's never been an assistant building manager. She's probably never lived in a building where maybe she was in a tenant union or something. Actually, she spent a lot of time organizing tenant unions across New York City. But she knows nothing about the industry. She knows nothing about what it takes to keep a building operating and keep your tenants happy and to keep things prepared. And what they reveal in that little snippet of that video that we showed is the scam going on here, because New York City is suffering under rent control, where the landlord, and there is a housing crisis. There's a shortage of housing in New York City. There's no doubt about it. But the main culprit of that is rent control, which is government saying that you cannot charge more than X amount for rent every month for your building. And those rates do not change. Do you know what doesn't change? The inflation rate, the cost of what it takes to maintain that building. So this is the scam that they're running. And it's legitimately what they're trying to do in New York City. You have a rent-controlled apartment building. You have a landlord that owns that building. He can't raise the rent, so he can't afford to do the proper repairs in his building. And so the city comes in and says, "This is a dilapidated building, so that we are going to seize it from you. And so we will just take your property because obviously, yes. Are there real slumlords? Are there people that are there landlords that genuinely are abusing their tenants they could afford to improve it, but they're not doing it? Of course, but that is not the norm. The norm in this situation is a rent-controlled apartment where the landlord cannot get enough revenue to do the proper repairs for the building. So what happens? The city is just going to come in and take it from you. And she says it like she's taking, like she's buying something on sale at Kohl's or something. It's just like, oh, of course, we'll just take it. We'll just take it from you. And so when you set it up to make it that easy, it's going to happen pretty fast. That's communism. That is absolutely un-American. It doesn't, frankly, it doesn't matter if the building is dilapidated unless there's some criminal activity going on. The Constitution of the United States does not allow government to just seize your property based on some pretext. That is unconstitutional. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when these policies that they talk about so blithely are actually tried to be carried out, because ultimately they are going to have to be carried out at the point of a gun.
Well, I think she wants to be Jane Addams, but she's not Jane Addams. Okay, then second of all, like these people are not living in tenements. She's not Jacob Reese, who's like going and taking pictures of like 60 people, like living in like a cramped quarters. Like let's start there. Second of all, New York City has some of the most restrictive zoning laws, some of the most arcane building permit laws, the labor costs. Almost everything has to be union labor. So the city has just put so many regulations and so many hurdles to disincentivize the building of new homes and new apartment buildings in the city, that the New York City comptroller admitted last year that there's a, quote, dearth of inventory of housing in New York City. So this is a real simple thing. Jim hit the nail on the head. You have you have a lack of supply. Increase the supply. Don't go after the existing supply and say we're going to take them over and and make them public housing. That's not going to solve your problem. So this woman she just doesn't understand basic economics.
Regulation is indeed the problem here, because what happens is you say, well, we're going to apply the same rules to everybody, and making people have their apartment buildings in neighborhoods where the tenants can't pay much, have the same services and conditions as an apartment building in Manhattan doesn't make any sense. You're going to reduce the housing access in that way. And so what happens is when you're using regulation, you're using a steamroller to get your effect. Whereas the proper approach is Judge Judy, where if somebody's not living up to their side of a bargain, then you can take them to court and make sure that they act upon that. For example, if somebody's turned off your heat, you should have access to the courts and have the court order that person to turn the darn heat on if that's part of the deal. Now, if you're not paying for the heat, then I don't see how you have any right to it. That's a difficult thing, that we don't get everything we want in this world. Now, when you say, well, but people need heat, they need food, they need shelter and so forth. Chris mentioned having 60 people in an apartment would be a bad thing, and it certainly would. But the alternative then that you're taking when you use regulation is you throw those 60 people out on the street because the apartment disappears. So you have to use your common sense in these things, and regulation does not get the job done. And as Jim and Chris both said so eloquently, it's immoral and evil and so harmful. So this system will simply implode and further destroy New York City.
When, socialists, they just love to take your stuff. The same with communists. It's kind of their main modus operandi. And with how sketchy the markets and stuff are, how questionable, or maybe you don't even want to get involved in all of that. If you want to stuff your mattress with something that they can't steal digitally, might I recommend gold, particularly gold. Particularly gold. That's a drum roll. That's not right. Particularly gold from our friends at Advisor Metals. So a lot of people in conservative spaces, you guys will hit you with ads for buying precious metals. They're not wrong that they are a good investment, but you want to be careful about who you buy them from. At In the Tank, we trust Advisor Metals over all of those other guys. And that's because we know that the person running the place is absolutely the best of the best. A great friend of Liberty, Ira Bershatsky owns and is the managing member of Advisor Metals. He has decades of experience in precious metals and is the only person in the physical precious metals industry who has the Commodities Futures Trading Commission federal registration. So what does that mean? Well, it means that everything Ira or a member of his team says to you has to be factual. So there's no sketchy sales pitch or bait and switch or anything like that. Ira is held to the highest ethical standards, and there is full transparency, which is way too lacking in other places nowadays. If you want to diversify your investment portfolio and your savings, if you are planning for retirement and are concerned about economic uncertainty, if you want a tangible asset that is easy to buy and sell, you can secure your assets with a wide range of physical precious metals by getting in touch with our friend Ira at Advisor Metals. He is going to make it very easy for you. So please visit climaterealismshow.com/metals, and you can leave your information for Ira and get started with investing in precious metals and expand your current portfolio. Go to climaterealismshow.com/metals, and when you talk to Ira, don't forget to tell him that we sent you. That helps us as you're helping your financial future by diversifying with precious metals from Advisor Metals. Okay, I thought that was pretty good. That fairly decent transition there. I think we have a couple other things to look at from Miss Weaver as well. Or am I mistaken? Just one more. Okay, let's take a look.
We should really look to what Brandon Johnson and as well as the Chicago Teachers Union is doing to really use the schools and the city as sites of resistance against the federal incursion. If you're comfortable in your coalition, you're not winning power. If ICE and the National Guard are coming to New York City, ICE is already here. If the National Guard is coming on January 1st, which we know they are, we really have to use our tenant associations and our parent-teacher associations and our public schools as like networks of defense in support of Saran's agenda and in support of our neighbors.
Yeah.
Chicago Teachers Union. Chris, do you think the Chicago Teachers Union should be a model for anything?
No.
Oh, where's Chris?
How about teaching them how to read, do some basic math? That's what they should be focusing on. I just cannot believe that she is stooping to this level, but I guess they're desperate. I guess they are really desperate.
As places of resistance, Chris, we're resisting with the Chicago Teachers Union.
Well, it's all kind of funny. It's easy to laugh at that, but what you need to realize is that these people are deadly serious, and sometimes their plans get deadly. I mean, they really do. They have used our public schools, not just to indoctrinate our children into socialism and communism and to hate their country. They feel it is their duty to use every bit of power they have to advance communism and to crush. The important part is to crush the American way of life as we know it right now. Because democratic social, you can call it democratic socialism all you want. As the people of Venezuela found out, under democratic socialism, you do get a vote one time, and that's it, and that's the end of that. What you find, and it's easy to laugh. Again, this is kind of cosplaying at the resistance, right? And it is, the first instinct is to, if you're a normal American for whom this is really foreign to you, and you go about and live your life, taking your kids to soccer games and watching the NFL on weekends, this is not part of your life. You see it show up in an X feed here and there, but these people are deadly serious, and it ends up with people getting killed. We have not talked about the woman in Minneapolis who was tragically shot and killed because she was protesting ICE and getting in the way and obstructing the legal carrying out of federal immigration law in the city of Minneapolis. She's the kind of person who would have listened to this and said, yes, resist, who maybe attended meetings like at their PTA and started, let's talk about how we're going to use that to resist the fascist Trump administration, openly talking about, and Tim Walz did this yesterday, openly talking about using whatever levers of power that they may have on a local level to resist the federal government. When they come into our city, we're going to resist them. Tim Walz talked about using the Minnesota National Guard to protect Minnesotans from Trump's troops. This is insane talk, and it is all on the left. The irony of this happening, the day after we played the silly candlelight vigil the Democrats did on Capitol Hill, the day after having a candlelight vigil about, the insurrection that wasn't an insurrection on January 6th, and then every other day except that day, openly calling for legitimate insurrection and for resistance in every way possible. The left people, the people organizing this, all the people, and if you looked carefully at that video, it was the tarp over the table was talking about how they were a radical publisher. These people have been around for decades, creating radical literature, and it's all very kind of funny and silly and academic until they start gaining actual power and using their positions to endanger, frankly, the lives of ICE agents. That woman should have never been there protesting like that. They train these people. NGOs get money to train these people to be so-called legal observers. A legal observer is supposed to just be using their camera phone to record, ICE agents carrying out and enforcing federal law. You're not supposed to get in the way of ICE. You're not supposed to follow them all over the city. You're not supposed to try to obstruct what they're doing. And you certainly don't point your car at an ICE agent and then hit the accelerator and expect nothing to happen. More people are going to die because of the radical messaging of people like this that have been doing it literally for decades. And it's coming to the fore now because of the tragedy of yesterday. And as we are learning over the last 4 or 5 days about who exactly this Sia Weaver is and where she came from. Where she came from was here, and from decades of leftist communist indoctrination in almost every education center in this country for decades. A lot of young people. I was young once. I got through university without being indoctrinated. Linnea is much younger than me. She happily got through the university system, not indoctrinated into leftism, so she still has her wits about her. But a lot of people didn't. And, now they are out there trying to resist and making America a very dangerous place.
I do have a quick comment on this Minnesota situation. So I was watching the news last night and I wanted to see how that was being covered. And, Fox obviously was a little bit, I'd say, more giving the benefit of the doubt to the ICE agent. However, then I went and watched some CNN and some MS Now coverage, because remember, MSNBC is gone. It's MS Now. It's really cool. And it was the total opposite. They had already determined that the ICE officer was probably guilty of murder. And they were basically inflaming, viewers that this is just the beginning and there's more of this to come. So I just thought that was really, really, just sick and twisted on behalf of CNN and MS Now. And I hope that they tone down the rhetoric, because we don't need more of this.
Did you see what Jimmy Kimmel just did again? Yeah. So for our viewers who might not have seen, Jimmy Kimmel brought out like a t-shirt that said "Trump is coming to kill you" on it, or something along those lines. And it's like, oh, cool. Yeah, no, that's not going to terrify people who are unstable into doing violent actions at all. Like, okay. Oh, geez. Yeah, we're in a very bad place. It's certainly, if you were optimistic enough to think that the assassination of Charlie Kirk would get the left to chill out a little bit for more than half a minute. Yeah, no.
And the 2 assassination attempts against President Trump. We seem to have forgotten that. Uh-oh. I put my hand up and it made balloons.
Yeah, you know what? Another thing that happened less than half of a mile from where the George Floyd issue took place. So this is a far left little enclave there in Minnesota. And what's going on with Minnesota with all the fraud and all the other stuff? I mean, Minnesota is just a hot mess right now. Total dumpster fire.
Yeah, we
The-
said at the top of the show. Sorry, Sam. I'm just gonna say this real quick. We said at the top of the show that there's too much news just this week, and especially over the holidays and stuff, to cover everything in as much detail as we would like to on this one show. But Minneapolis is absolutely, in particular, just falling to pieces, and it has been gradually over the last probably couple of years, at least maybe a decade.
Ever since
Just-
Al Franken got elected senator.
Yeah, every time you
He
see
stole that
like
election.
something crazy in the news, it's always Minneapolis.
Governor Walz's statement that they're basically going to fight the federal government with the National Guard. First of all, it's ignorant of the legalities of using the National Guard, but it's ignorant of so many things. But remember, it builds on what has been going on for years, and in fact, a couple of decades. Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, had basically said the same thing. We are going to resist. They're talking physically resisting. And he has encouraged people to do that. And Gavin Newsom in California was making similar statements. And what this does is it makes people, it destroys lines of authority. And it's sort of, let's go to a sort of a philosophical point that it almost undermines the great chain of being. And you lose your sense of your place in society, and you decide that, okay, because this other person is wrong in my view, I can and must do whatever I can to stop them. And so you point your car at an ICE officer. That is assault with a deadly weapon. That's on the books, and people get prosecuted for that all the time. So this is a very clear crime, a capital crime, if insofar as there's any capital punishment anymore. But it's assault with a deadly weapon, and you're going to get shot if that person can do so. So what has happened here is that these politicians they may have some good in their minds about these things, that they're trying to ensure that people are getting their rights protected and so forth. But what they're doing, in fact, is unleashing hell, frankly. They're just absolutely unleashing the worst impulses in people. And these are not serious people. Mamdani and his housing commissioner, they're not serious people. They're serious about what they're doing, and they're intentional about it, but they're not serious. If they were serious, they'd do some reading and thinking. This is important stuff. You know, when you're talking about how are we as a city or as a state going to respond to the federal government's decision to come into our state and enforce the national immigration laws? What are we going to do about that? Well, the first answer would be we're going to cooperate with them if they're actually following the law, which the federal government clearly is. So when you step outside of that, you are creating an environment and a mentality that makes the individual's conscience somehow above all legalities and all law. And we're not going to survive that way. So what's going to happen is, I think, an escalation and then a stop, because it can only go so far. And I don't think that the federal government in particular under President Trump is just going to say, well, okay, we'll back down. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to look more like Venezuela than George Floyd era.
A lot of the politicians.
I think what you're going to see from the Trump administration is, we could talk about in the law, the incitement to violence under the law is very difficult to prosecute and prove because it has to be very specific calls to violence. So it's difficult. It's rarely charged, and I think pretty rarely you get convictions on that. But what the left, and frankly, MS Now and CNN and a lot of people in the legacy media have been doing since November 2024 is frankly inciting violence. It's why Charlie Kirk was shot. It's why there were 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. It's why you have these riots in the streets. It's why you have these people, just stirred up into absolute hatred, into a frenzy, putting themselves in very dangerous situations by putting their bodies between armed ICE agents carrying out federal law by rounding up criminal illegal aliens, not necessarily just criminals because they entered the country illegally, but illegal aliens who are also committed crimes on the soil of the United States. If you think you have to be crazy or be ginned up into a complete, absolute mindless frenzy to believe it when people like a Mamdani or Rachel Maddow or all of these community organizers, tell that you need to put your body, and they say, you hear this rhetoric, you got to put your body in between ICE and these innocent people they're trying to round up, and then they actually do it, and it's a very dangerous thing, and you would think this would be a wake-up moment for some of these people who have now enlisted themselves as the ground troops, for radical leftists and communists and agitators in this country. You would think that would be, hey, they're not putting their bodies in between ICE and criminal illegal aliens that armed ICE agents. They would expect me to do it. You would think that would be a wake-up moment, because that's a very dangerous place to be. And you would have, if you were thinking clearly, you would come to realize these people do not have my best interest in mind. They certainly don't have the country's best interest in mind. I'm being used as a pawn for a revolution. They get to cosplay as revolutionaries, but that poor woman in Minneapolis who was shot because she was using her vehicle as a weapon. I would think certainly that's what the law is going to come up with. She is a real revolutionary who paid the ultimate price for it. Donald Trump, if they think Donald Trump's going to back down because of that, that's not going to happen. I've heard calls for maybe Trump can, maybe just cool things down and maybe take a week or 2 off, to send ICE home. No way is that going to happen. Donald Trump that would be a sign of weakness. It would certainly be seen as a sign of weakness. Donald Trump is not going to allow that to happen. So things are going to get out of control. And the people responsible for this are not the ICE agents doing their duty. It is not members of the Trump administration carrying out the enforcement of federal immigration law. The fault for all of this, all of it, lies on the hands of the radical left who want this, who have been agitating for this, who want to finally bring to life and make real their calls for revolution from academia. These people, again, tying it back to Cia Weaver, these people that have never done a single thing in the real world that constructive in their entire lives are suddenly now put in power positions in this country, and ruin and sometimes death is going to be the result.
And one quick follow-on point: the intensity with which this is moving forward, the opposition to immigration enforcement, shows very clearly the importance of it to the radicals on the left. And why is it so important? Because they really want to replace the voting population, or let's say change the voting population such that they will have a one party state, one party government across the United States for good.
This is all
That's why this is so important.
This is also about the rule of law, and Jim made a great point, because if Donald Trump and ICE agents were to say, okay, we're gonna stand back here for a week, that would embolden people to do this more and more and more. So I think what I've seen so far is that Trump administration and ICE officials are saying, we're actually going to go in there even harder, and we're going to make sure that we do this, and that is the ultimate solution. And just one quick thing, Jim talked about the left having a history of violence. I mean, this goes back to the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, whether underground, even Occupy Wall Street. I know they weren't violent, but they were, they were very different from the other movement going on at point in time, the Tea Party movement, who went and peacefully protested, cleaned up all their little, like, their little stuff. And when I look and see these these like leftist radicals throwing snowballs at ICE agents, and just it's gross, it's disgusting. They don't actually have a solution there. It's dark. It doesn't help anybody. It's got to stop, and the only way it's going to stop is I think with the Trump administration saying, we are not going to let up. You are not going to win this. We have the federal authority to do this. We are implementing the rule of law, and that's what's going to happen here. They're going to have to learn, from things like this, that the Trump administration means business here.
I was going to say, at the beginning of the year in 2025, when Trump first started rolling out his agenda, and if we first got the indication that he really was serious about like removing as many illegal aliens from the country as possible, whether it's from, offering them help getting like going back home or whatever it was, or these like ICE raids and stuff, I knew instantly. I said, there are a lot of Republicans that say that they want this who are not going to have the stomach for this, because they're the MSN Now and How and CNN and all of those, they're going to play 24/7 videos of crying kids, crying old ladies, that kind of MSNDC. That's right. Or MSDNC. And people are, not sociopath. People who are not sociopaths are going to feel a little heartstring tug from it. The key is whether or not you can say, okay, this is propaganda. Yes, people are upset to be removed when they're here illegally. They're going to have to be upset because they broke the law. But sorry, not sorry. But there are a lot of people who they see like one crying person on the news and they are instantly flipping in the other direction on what they say that they believe. And we're gonna have to deal with this over and over and over again for the next couple of years. And I'm not talking about this with regards to just the tragic and unnecessary death of this woman. It's across the board, right? On every Trump policy, there's going to be a lot of crying and wailing. On the UN stuff, there's going to be crying and wailing, because surely at least one of the organizations we are no longer funding gave like bread rolls to starving kids in Africa somewhere, that kind of thing. At least at one point in time before the UN blue helmets show up, and who knows what they do from there. But anyway, yeah, sorry guys, but that is really all the time that we have today. If anybody has any comments to make really quickly to the end here, I don't want to be the last person talking on these subjects. Anything? Nope. All right. We have covered it all. Okay, so that is all the time we have, you guys, unfortunately. Thank you, everyone, for your attention to these matters. We are live every single week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all over the place. Jim, what do you have to pitch to our audience today?
We have the first climate realism show of 2026 coming tomorrow, Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. See you there.
All right, Sam?
Life, Liberty, Property newsletter at the Heartland Institute website, which is heartland.org, and at stkarnick.substack.com.
Yeah, and Sam's Substack is great too, so go give that a read, you guys. Chris, what have you got?
All right, well, I'm going to go in a very different direction here. I'm going to go in my little sports here. My Indiana Hoosiers have a huge game Friday night against Oregon. We got to win. This is our year. We're going to win the national championship. And then my Chicago Bears have got to beat the Green Bay Packers at Soldier Field this Saturday. It's going to be a very, very busy weekend for yours truly. I hope I can contain myself.
All right, thank you very much. So for audio listeners, please rate us well on whatever service you're using and leave a review. Thank you so much to all of our usual panelists. Love talking to you guys. And to all of our viewers who have great questions and great contributions to the discussion as well. We will see you all again next week.